You make it impossible for me to look away. The hoarse confession of Elias, a penniless cowboy, broke out the moment he stood close behind the woman who owned Silver Creek Ranch, wealthy, yet alone. Outside, night rain hammered the barn roof. Lightning lit the calloused hand he laid over her small one, both holding the slick wire tight. His breath, hot and ragged, mingled with the damp scent of her hair, laced with herbs, making her tremble but not draw back. Lantern light threw their joined shadows across the wooden wall, a blurred shape that hinted at a bond deeper than work. And in that thick silence, a tender question burned. Would one kiss in the storm be enough to bridge the distance between a proud ranch mistress and a wandering man? Spring rain in Montana did not fall as a soft veil, but came down in heavy bursts, like hammers striking hard earth. The dirt road through the valley turned into a slick stretch of mud, clinging to a traveler's boots as if to hold him there. Elias Thorne pulled the collar of his worn coat high, water streaming off his boots, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and damp horsehide. He had strayed from the main trail more than an hour ago. The crumpled delivery slip in his pocket, ink smeared by the rain, still bore the words, Morrison Ranch, delivery. Yet the road he had taken ended at a massive gate of wrought iron, its surface worked with intricate designs, 2 silver letters glaring bright. Silver Creek Ranch. Elias stopped his horse. He lifted his eyes to the gate. In a land of Montana winds, where sagging wooden fences were common sights, such a gate looked foreign, like the entry to another world. Too proud, too grand, and it made his mud-stained boots and patched-up coat feel all the more wretched. A bolt split the sky, thunder rolling across the valley. His horse reared and snorted, spraying mud. Elias gripped the reins tight, sighed low. Morrison Ranch or Silver Creek Ranch. He had no choice but to find shelter. The gate was unlatched. He pushed it open, hinges creaking, and moved quietly onto the gravel path winding toward the main house. Mud trailed behind him with each step. The mansion rose high, white columns reaching into the storm, a wide porch wrapping its arms around the yard. Through the rain's blur, the house radiated a power that could not be mistaken. Wealth, authority, and loneliness. Elias drew a long breath, climbed the painted steps, and knocked. The sound echoed through the hollow air, like an intrusion on solemn silence. At last, the door cracked open, revealing a gaunt face framed by silver hair drawn tight, gray dress pressed sharp. The housekeeper's eyes flicked to his filthy boots, her disdain bare. "You've knocked at the wrong door," she said curtly. "Deliveries go round the back." Elias touched the brim of his hat, his voice roughened by cold wind. "Beg pardon, ma'am. I have a slip marked for Morrison Ranch, but the gate out front read Silver Creek. I fear I've gone astray." For a moment, the housekeeper's brows arched. Her tone turned sharp as steel. "Morrison Ranch burned down 3 years back. Mr. Morrison left for California after his wife passed. There is no Morrison here." "You're at the wrong place," Elias froze. The chill of rain seeped deeper into his skin. He fumbled for words, but a woman's voice called from inside, low yet smooth, touched with the roughness of command born under open skies. "What is it, Mrs. Henley?" The woman stepped forward, and Elias forgot what he meant to say. She stood near 5.5 feet, slender yet strong, skin bronzed like southern sunlight, black hair drawn back, loose strands framing sharp features. Her eyes, green as spring water, cut into him, calm yet keen as a blade. A simple blue dress clung, hem marked by mud, but the hardened hands showed she was no stranger to work. For an instant, Elias felt seen straight through to the bone. "This man came looking for Morrison Ranch," Mrs. Henley said, her voice edged with scorn. "I told him Morrison's long gone." The woman nodded once, then fixed her gaze on Elias. Her voice, husky yet firm, carried weight. "Morrison left Montana years ago, but if you've braved this storm to reach our gate, the least you can do is come inside, dry your clothes, and rest before you go on." Her look softened a shade, like light breaking through cloud. Mrs. Henley frowned, ready to object, but the woman tilted her head, silencing her with ease. Elias clutched the leather strap of his satchel tighter, uneasy at the sight of the polished marble floor beyond. Each muddy step of his would stain it. But when her green eyes met his rain-soaked face once more, he gave a slow nod. "Thank you, ma'am," Elias said, voice rough. Her reply came firm and clear. "Marisol Vega, owner of Silver Creek Ranch." The name fell with the rain, echoing in his ears like fate itself. He crossed the threshold, leaving the storm behind, unaware that from that moment forward, his life would take a turn bound to the woman with green eyes and sunlit skin. Rain still hammered the porch roof, as though it meant to drown the house in sheets of silver water. Elias stepped across the threshold, his boots striking the polished marble floor, leaving behind dark streaks of mud. Each step felt like an intrusion, enough to draw a tight grimace from Mrs. Henley, her lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "Boots like those, and he dares set foot in here," she muttered, reaching for a rag, ready to kneel and scrub. But Marisol stopped her with the faintest tilt of her head. "Leave it for later, Mrs. Henley. Bring wood to the kitchen first. The man has been out in the storm all day. He doesn't need more scorn piled on him." Her voice was not raised, but sharp enough to make the housekeeper lower her eyes, bow, and retreat into the shadowed hall. Elias stood awkward in the middle of the entry. Before him stretched a broad staircase with walnut rails gleaming, oil paintings in gilded frames along the wall. He knew well enough the Persian rug beneath his feet cost more than a whole season's trapping. And there it was, marked now by the mud from his cheap boots. "Follow me," Marisol said without pause. He trailed behind her, clutching the strap of his leather satchel, trying to walk careful so as not to soil more of the floor, though each step pressed its print deeper. The hall opened into the back, where warm golden light spilled through a wide doorway. The scent of wood smoke and faint coffee hung in the air. They entered a kitchen broad and lived in. Unlike the solemn grandeur of the front hall, this place breathed life. Shelves lined with jars, strings of garlic hanging, a long table draped in coarse cloth, and a cast-iron stove glowing red, pushing warmth against the storm outside. "Sit," Marisol said, pulling out a chair. Her eyes rested on his rain-worn face. Elias hesitated, about to refuse, but her gaze carried a certainty that left no room for protest. He sat. She poured coffee from a copper pot resting on the stove. Steam rose, carrying a rich bitterness that made Elias swallow hard. He had drunk weak black water at trading posts all winter. This smell turned his hunger into an ache. Marisol set the cup before him. As her hand touched the wooden table, the rough skin at her fingers showed. Elias saw it at once. Those calluses were not born from pens and crystal glasses. They came from shovels, reins, and hard ground. He lifted the cup slow. The sharp, bitter steam filled his lungs. The burn spread across his tongue. His eyes closed for a breath, heat seeping into his body. When he opened them, Marisol was seated across from him, hands folded, eyes fixed on his face. And there, in the green of her gaze, he saw himself reflected. A drifter, coat frayed, brown hair plastered with rain, shoulders bent from years of mountains and storms. He felt the urge to drop his hat lower, to hide the tattered parts of himself, but knew under those eyes nothing could be hidden. "Where do you come from?" Marisol asked, her husky voice softer now than on the porch. "North Country. I'm used to the high ridges," Elias answered, steadying his tone. "The winter cut deep this year. I came down to Billings to find work. At the store, they said Morrison Ranch needed a special saddle rig delivered. I took the job, but—" He shrugged, setting the cup down. "Seems Morrison Ranch lives only in memory." Marisol dipped her head, her eyes shadowing. "Many things in Montana vanish like smoke in the wind. But Silver Creek still stands." Elias gave a thin smile, unsure if it was in respect or bitterness. "That's plain enough." His glance swept the bright kitchen, and before he could check himself, he said, "This is the warmest place I've sat in months." Marisol did not answer. She let her hand drift over a scratch in the table, a casual touch. Yet Elias noticed the faint cracks in her skin, the traces of ash and earth, marks of someone who had stoked fires, hauled water, and worked the ground herself. She was no ranch mistress who lived only by command. The thought made Elias grip his satchel tighter. He felt both respect and unease. This woman, with her piercing green eyes and weathered hands, was nothing like the fine ladies of town. Outside, rain kept falling, closing the ranch from the world. Inside the kitchen, with firelight and coffee between them, Elias and Marisol sat facing one another. Two souls from different worlds, one with mud on his boots, the other with silver in her ranch's name, yet sharing a silence that no longer pressed heavy. It was a silence that carried the shape of a beginning. The kitchen warmed quickly as the fire in the stove roared bright, casting restless light against the wooden walls. Elias sat on a bench near the window, boots set aside to keep from spreading more mud across the floor. His wet coat hung on a peg, and for the first time in days, warmth seeped deep into his bones. Yet ease did not follow. The presence of Marisol Vega unsettled him, his heartbeat off its steady rhythm. She sat opposite, a leather ledger in her hands, lines of figures scrawled across its pages. Her brow was tight, her green eyes shadowed with fatigue. When she lifted her gaze, propping her chin on her hand, she studied Elias as though weighing a high-stakes game. "You know ranch work?" Marisol asked, her voice both curious and testing. Elias shrugged. "I can handle horses, hunt, survive the mountains. As for cattle, I figure I can learn." A fleeting smile brushed her lips, gone as fast as lightning over the plains. "I need a foreman. The last one walked out on the eve of roundup. I can't let 8,000 heads scatter like leaves on the wind." Elias raised his brows. He had never heard a number so large, not for one woman alone to manage. "The work is heavy, and it is endless," she went on. "I'll set 3 conditions. Meet them, you stay. Fail, and you leave with no debt between us." The fire snapped, underlining each word. She held up 3 fingers, her tone firm. "First, you'll see the herd through spring without losing more than 5% to wolves or misfortune. Second, the water system is failing. 1 main well and 2 ditches must be repaired. Without them, the grass dies and I lose the season. Third, She paused, her eyes flashing sharp as a drawn blade. You'll stand for this ranch at public affairs. Fairs, church gatherings, association dinners. Silver Creek must have a steady face at my side, not a man who hides in the hills. Elias's mouth twitched. Herding and digging he could imagine. But society? He had never once dined with silver cutlery, nor owned a suit finer than his patched coat. He rubbed his jaw, thinking, "That's heavy work. What's the pay? $50 a month, board included. 75 if you meet all three." A low whistle slipped past his lips. That sum equaled a whole winter's toil with traps. He leaned forward, eyes meeting hers, voice low. "Then I've one condition of my own." Marisol's brow arched, her head tilting in challenge. "If I do all that, and more, if I give you 3 nights of unbroken sleep, free of worry, free of restless turning, then you'll grant me one evening. A supper, a dance, or simple talk beneath the porch. But it'll be mine." The kitchen fell still. Outside, storm winds pressed against the shutters, fire popped in the stove. Her green eyes flickered, rare hesitation in a woman so steady. Then she laughed under her breath, a sound half skeptical, half intrigued. "You think you can make me sleep easy?" Elias's grin cut rough beneath his stubble. "I reckon I can. You care to wager?" Marisol held his gaze a long while, then nodded slow. "So be it." A wager, Elias Thorne. In that moment, the air between them thickened, part bargain of work, part challenge of hearts. That evening, Marisol chose to share supper with the stranger soon-to-be foreman. Mateo, the ranch's round-bellied cook, bustled about with a pot of beef stew. Famous for his clumsiness, he proved it quick. The clatter from the back kitchen gave Elias fair warning. Mateo emerged, arms straining under the steaming pot. "A special supper," he boomed. Yet as he crossed the rug, his foot caught the table's edge. In an instant, the pot lifted, turned slow in the candlelight, then crashed down, stew spilling across the carpet. Red broth splattered Elias's shirt, streaked Marisol's hair, and filled the room with a thick, meaty smell. Mateo cried out, slipped, and landed flat in the mess. Silence froze the room. Mrs. Henley stood in the doorway, rigid as stone. Elias sat stiff, his shirt dripping stew, each drop tapping against the chair. He thought surely this was his end at Silver Creek. But Marisol laughed. First a small sound, then a ripple, then bright laughter that filled the hall. Her shoulders shook, her green eyes watered with mirth. Elias blinked, startled, then chuckled, the sound dragging out of him unbidden. Soon the grand room rang with their laughter, drowning the storm outside. He looked at her through the haze of steam. Hair clung wet against her cheek, her face marked by streaks of broth. Yet in the firelight she was striking, alive, unguarded, stripped of her earlier frost. In that instant, Elias knew, for the first time in his life, he had glimpsed the true face of Marisol Vega. The first days at Silver Creek Ranch passed in the smell of damp grass, the bawl of cattle, and the steady pounding of hammers on corrals. Elias rose before the rooster crowed, boots heavy with mud as he crossed the misted yard, shoulders bearing a wooden pail, shovel in hand. He grew into the rhythm of a vast ranch, where one small mistake could send hundreds of heads scattering across the valley. Marisol watched it all. She rarely spoke, but from the porch or with arms folded at the fence, Her green eyes followed his every move. The way he drove posts straight and true, never slacking. The way he led horses from the stalls, palm brushing their manes, his rough voice soothing even the wildest into calm. Every act bore the mark of experience, quiet, sure, without need of show. One morning, Marisol struggled to drag a bale of hay from the barn. The load was too heavy, dust clinging to her shoulder, strands of black hair falling loose against her sweat-damp face. Elias saw from across the yard and strode over. Without a word of flourish, he bent, eased her hands free, and lifted the bale to his shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "You needn't," Marisol began, but the words fell when his shadow cut off the morning sun. She pressed her lips tight, her hand still warm from his touch. He set the bale down where it belonged, brushed the dust from his palms, and said simply, "This load wasn't made for small hands. Leave it to me." The words were plain, yet they struck her heart like a plucked string. Work at the ranch was more than hay and corrals. There was also Mateo, who managed to turn each day into some half-ruined comedy. One afternoon, while Elias was stabling a horse, a cry rang from the storage loft. He ran in to find Mateo dangling from a broken rung, clutching a sack of flour. The ladder gave way, Mateo crashed down, and the sack burst into a white cloud that swallowed the whole room. Coughing through the haze, Elias hauled him up. When the dust cleared, Mateo looked like raw dough, face chalk white, hair spiked, nose red from the fall. Marisol appeared in the doorway, caught the sight, and laughed. It rang like a bell, bright and unrestrained. Elias had not heard such a sound from her in all his days there. Mateo sputtered apologies. Elias shook his head, and at last a grin tugged free. For a moment, 3 lives, so different, were bound by the simplest thread of clumsy laughter. The next dawn, Elias rode the range. Sky still gray with lingering night, he cracked his whip, urging cattle into motion. Hooves thundered across wet earth, great beasts moving as one, dust rising in the gold of morning. From afar, Marisol stood wrapped in her coat, eyes fixed on him in the saddle. She saw a different Elias, not the lost man at her gate, nor the awkward stranger at her table, but a cowboy in full measure. Steady hands, sharp gaze, body moving in rhythm with the herd. The sight drew her chest tight, strange and familiar all at once. By evening he returned, shirt clinging with sweat. As he unsaddled the horse, stroking its weary mane, he heard footsteps. Marisol approached, a folded cloth in hand. "You'll need this," she said, holding it out. Elias took it, his fingers brushing hers. The touch was brief, yet she recoiled as though struck by fire. Turning away, she hid her eyes. He said nothing, only wiped his brow, though a faint smile bent his lips. At night, the ranch fell still. Marisol sat on the porch with her ledger, the lamplight gold on her sun-browned face, shadows deep in her eyes. Elias passed a few times, tipping his head, moving on. Once she lifted her gaze and met his in the dim. No word was spoken, yet something unnamed lingered there. Silver Creek Ranch, once vast and cold, now breathed with new life. From muddy boot prints on marble floors, Elias had begun carving his place by steady proof of worth. And Marisol, once only a watcher, found herself drawn into his quiet presence. The fleeting touches, the sudden laughter at Mateo's blunders, the simple weight of shared silence, all spun into a thread. a fragile thread pulling two distant souls closer. And though neither would admit it, both Elias and Marisol knew. The thread was tightening, waiting for the moment it would snap into flame. The wind had risen since afternoon, lashing long against the wooden walls. Darkness fell heavy, clouds swollen, thunder rolling far across the valley. Elias, checking the eastern fence line, found several posts broken, barbed wire sprung loose like a wolf's teeth. He scowled, knowing if the storm broke hard, the herd would tear through and scatter across the plains. He hurried back, but before he reached the porch, he saw Marisol already cloaked, lantern in hand. The wind tangled her hair, but her green eyes burned steady. "The east fence?" she called, her voice cutting through the gale. "It must be fixed." "But the storm's coming. You needn't go." Marisol shook her head. "This is my ranch. If the fence falls, I'll be there." Elias meant to argue, but one look into her eyes told him there was no stopping her. They plunged into the field together, mud swallowing their boots, rain beginning to strike in heavy drops. At the break, the pines moaned, rain hammered their coats. Elias lit the lantern, hung it from a post, its gold trembling light showing wires slick as serpents. "Hold this post," he shouted hoarse. Marisol braced it, her small hands steady with strength. Her cloak clung wet to her shoulders. Elias drove a new stake, muscles straining beneath his soaked shirt, raindrops cutting down his cheek. When it came to binding the wire, she fumbled, hands slipping, unable to twist it right. Elias stepped close, his chest near her back, his breath warm against the chill of rain. "It's not force," he murmured, lips near her ear. "You guide it gentle." Let it find its place, he laid his rough hand over hers, guiding the turn. Marisol froze, heart pounding, breath uneven. The storm seemed to fall away, leaving only his arms around her, the strange safety of his presence. "See?" Elias whispered. "It slides easy when the angle's right." Her throat tightened, though her lips were wet with rain. The wire locked into place, yet neither moved, hand over hand, the lantern's flicker casting their shadow as one against the boards. A bolt split the sky, white fire lighting her face as she turned. In her eyes flickered something fierce and trembling. The space between them shrank to breath alone. Elias's voice dropped, a confession torn raw. "You make it impossible for me to look away." Marisol pressed her lips, but did not turn aside. Elias knew then this moment would not wait. He bent, brushed her mouth with his, hesitant, afraid to break what was fragile. But when she answered, the kiss became real. Real as the wet grass, as the salt of rain on their lips, as the hammer of hearts in their chests. His hand drew her in. Her fingers clung, trembling, to his shoulder. Rain pounded the stable roof, horses stamped and snorted, yet it was only backdrop to the collision of two worlds in that kiss. When they broke apart, Marisol's breath came quick, her cheeks flushed despite the storm's cold. Elias still held, her close, his thumb brushing the soaked cloth at her back. "Perhaps," he said low, voice rough, "this is no longer just work." Her eyes wavered, then softened with a rare smile, a flame in the storm. "Perhaps," she whispered. They finished the fence side by side, hands brushing now and then, each touch a spark. Elias felt every glance of hers ease the storm around him. Marisol felt her heartbeat stumble at each brush of his hand. When it was done, they led one another to the stable, taking shelter beneath the eaves. The lantern swung above, light falling on mud-streaked cheeks and rain-drenched hair. Elias pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She lifted her gaze, words on her lips, but only a nod escaped. Her eyes said the rest. Outside, the rain poured on, but inside, among hay and the damp scent of straw, beneath the trembling glow of lantern light, the fragile thread between Elias and Marisol had become something stronger. A fire. A fire that began with a kiss. The storm had passed, leaving a sky streaked with gray clouds and puddles glinting with the weak lantern light in the stable. Elias's coat still lay across Marisol's shoulders. They stood silent, unwilling to step away from what had just happened. That kiss, brief though it was, had shifted something deep, no longer masked by polite nods or guarded words. The pounding of hooves cut through the fragile quiet. Marisol lifted her head, eyes narrowing. Elias turned, his hand falling to the knife at his belt, a habit born of mountain living. Minutes later, a rider emerged through the mist, tall in the saddle, tack polished too fine for Silver Creek mud. Cortland Arroyo. They called him the king of half the territory, for nearly half the cattle in Montana bore his family's brand. Tonight, under the jagged flash of lightning, he looked like a man who had never known defeat. Spine straight, smile thin, black eyes glinting with scorn. Marisol Vega. His voice rang deep, careless of the rain still dripping down. Strange to see you awake so late. Or perhaps, his glance flicked toward Elias, lips curling. Someone else tends your fences for you now? Marisol straightened, pulling the coat tighter, eyes sharp as a blade. You ride through Silver Creek in a storm just to sneer at me, Cortland? He dipped his head, bowing like a gentleman, but the gesture struck like a knife point. Of course not. I came to invite you to the Cattlemen's Association supper next week. They're debating new divisions of water rights. Surely Silver Creek would not wish to be forgotten. Elias felt Cortland's eyes rake over him, soaking in the wet shirt, the mud-caked boots, before the man let out a smile of disdain. And who is this? Cortland asked, voice careless. I don't recall Silver Creek hiring a drifter from the hills to play foreman. Elias gave no answer at once. His brown eyes held steady, unflinching. He knew the kind. Men who wielded words like whips, who lived to command, who thrived on seeing others bow. Marisol stepped forward, blocking the question with her presence. This is Elias Thorne, my new foreman, and he is more than capable of keeping Silver Creek standing, even when others would rather see it fall. A taut silence. Cortland pulled the reins. His horse snorted, hooves splashing mud. Then he laughed, a sound edged with threat. A foreman, is he? Interesting. I suppose, Marisol, you prefer calloused hands to white gloves at your dinners. But remember, society is not the stable. One wrong glance, one clumsy word, and your ranch loses its share. Marisol's reply came cold as steel. I know who I will bring with me. Cortland tilted his head, bowed deeper, though his smile turned sharp as frost. Then I look forward to meeting Elias Thorne in something less muddy. He wheeled his horse, leaving behind a trace of herb-scented cologne and a thin laugh that drifted into the wind. When the hoofbeats faded, Marisol stood rigid, her hand clenching the lantern until her knuckles whitened. Who is he? Elias asked, voice low. Cortland Arroyo, she answered, eyes still hard. The man who wants Silver Creek swallowed into his empire. That invitation was no courtesy. It was bait, meant to humiliate both me and— She faltered, her gaze flicking toward him. And you. Elias nodded. He knew such open challenges well. Yet what unsettled him wasn't Cortland's sneer. It was the tension hiding beneath Marisol's iron front. He stepped closer, voice quiet. If you want me at that supper, I'll stand by you. Even if it means tight collars, silver forks, or stumbling through a dance for the first time that night, Marisol laughed. Soft, fleeting, enough to scatter the dark. You'd only crush my dress with those boots. Elias shrugged. Then we'll choose a dance with no steps. Just standing close. Their eyes met, silent yet certain. The storm had not ended, but in Marisol's gaze shone something brighter than the lantern flame. A vow, unspoken but clear, that the coming fight they would face together. The night of the banquet came, wrapped in the splendor of the region's grandest hotel, the Grand Imperial. From afar, oil lamps blazed behind tall panes of glass, their glow spilling down stone steps draped with a red carpet. Elias stood at the entrance, tugging at the collar of the dark suit Marisol had given him that morning. The coat squeezed tight across his shoulders, nothing like the worn leather, horse sweat, and dust he knew. Stop fidgeting, Marisol murmured, slipping her hand through his arm. Tonight she wore a gown of deep emerald trimmed with white lace. Her black hair was curled and pinned, revealing a sun-bronzed face set in proud lines. You look fine. Just walk tall, not like you're herding cattle. Elias drew a breath, nodding once. If I step on your hem, don't hold it against me. Her glance held both mischief and steel. Then they walked through the heavy doors into another world entirely. Inside, chandeliers rained crystal light over a hall alive with violins and booming laughter from ranch barons. All eyes turned toward Marisol Vega, formidable mistress of Silver Creek, and the man at her side. Cortland Arroyo moved from a cluster of guests, his smile sharp as silk over a blade. Marisol, he bowed, and this must be your new foreman. Quite different. His last word hung like bait, loud enough for all to hear. Marisol smiled with poise. Cortland, this is Elias Thorne. He knows the work better than any I've hired. Cortland's dark eyes slid over Elias as if pricing a mule. He smirked, then led them toward the head table. Elias sat before rows of polished plates and gleaming silverware, uncertain where to begin. When the first course came, he gripped the carving knife to cut into salad, the clatter drawing muffled chuckles. Small one outside, Marisol whispered, guiding his hand with hers. The brief touch steadied him, though sweat pricked his brow. When the music struck up, Cortland strode forward, asking Marisol to dance. She declined, turning instead to lay her hand on Elias's arm. My foreman can dance. Elias stiffened, never having stepped onto a polished floor, let alone into a waltz. His boots faltered, nearly crushing her gown, and whispers of laughter stirred along the edges. Listen to the music, Marisol said softly, eyes locked on his. Not to them. Slowly, he found the rhythm. Still clumsy, but no longer lost. In that moment, there was only her green gaze and the sweep of the violins. Cortland spread his poison among the guests, remarks of cowhands dressed as gentlemen, of Marisol's new amusement. Elias heard each word, jaw tightening, hand white on the stem of his glass. Then the hall doors burst open. Mateo appeared, stuffed into a vest too tight, arms straining under a massive wedding cake smothered in white frosting and sugar flowers. "Senora, I thought the night needed something sweet," he bellowed, bustling forward across the carpet. Fate was cruel. His heel snagged the rug. He stumbled. The cake lifted from the tray, soared in perfect slow arc, then crashed squarely onto Cortland Arroyo's head. Frosting exploded, coating his slicked hair, sugar blossoms cascading over his fine suit. His proud face vanished beneath thick white cream. For one stunned breath, silence ruled. Then laughter erupted, first in bursts, then swelling into a roar. Applause, whistles, even a toast or two. Marisol covered her mouth, but her eyes glittered with delight. Elias allowed himself a rare grin. Mateo froze, stammering apologies. "Madre mia, I only meant to sweeten the air." Cortland scraped at his brow, only smearing worse, his rage drowned in relentless laughter. No one remembered his taunts now. They would remember only the most powerful man in Montana undone by a cake. That night, leaving the hotel, Elias draped his coat across Marisol's shoulders. She accepted, her eyes alight with rare joy. "See," she said quietly, "men may set traps, but fate always finds a way to humble the proudest." Elias nodded. The weight in his chest eased. In the echo of laughter behind them, one truth stood clear. From here on, neither of them would stand alone. Silver Creek had its defender, and men like Cortland Arroyo no longer seemed so mighty. The moon rode high as the carriage carried Elias and Marisol back to Silver Creek Ranch. The dirt road, slick with rain, shimmered under pale light, the air heavy with the scent of wet grass and the tang of wine still lingering on the tongue. The raucous banquet, the laughter echoing from the cake catastrophe, still rang in memory, but now there was only silence between them, quiet, weighted, and unbroken. Elias exhaled, tugging at his rumpled collar. "Thank you, Marisol," he said, his voice roughened by drink. "Had you not shielded me, I'd have been their fool long before that cake hit him." Marisol turned, her green eyes soft. "You stood on your own. You needed no defense then." A rare smile curved her lips, gentler than any gown or chandelier of the evening. "And tonight, you looked different. No longer a cowboy caked in mud, but a man I could be proud to stand beside." The words struck deep. A taut string inside Elias eased, warmth spreading down his spine. At the porch, they stepped out into the hush of night. Only insects sang and the wind sighed across the fields. They mounted the steps together, then halted as one. Elias meant to turn toward the small parlor, Marisol toward her rooms upstairs, yet both stopped short, caught as if by an invisible thread. Their eyes met. No words. No distance now, but a silence charged as lightning. Marisol pressed her lips tight, heart wild. Elias, touched by wine yet clear-headed, stepped closer. "Marisol," he breathed, low as a prayer, "if I go too far, stop me. But I don't want this night to end with only thanks." She stood still, eyes flashing something unnamed, half hesitation, half longing. Then she nodded, slow but sure. Elias clasped her hand, leading her down the quiet hall. The door closed behind, shadows and lamplight wrapping them close. His calloused hand brushed her cheek, tucking back a strand of loosened hair. He waited. Marisol closed her eyes, then rose on her own to meet his lips. This kiss was unlike the one beneath the storm. No rush, no thunder pressing them on. Slow, steady, a vow whispered in silence. Elias drew her in, heat piercing years of cold. She trembled but did not pull away. Instead, her hands found his back, holding firm. They sat at the edge of the bed, hands still clasped. "I never thought," Elias whispered hoarse, "I'd sit this close to anyone." "Nor I," Marisol murmured, breath warm against his lips. "I never thought I'd let anyone in." Walls fell. Suspicion, distance, the coldness of their first words. Gone, fading like old ghosts. Elias eased the pin from her hair. It fell loose, a black cascade over sun-browned shoulders. The lamp caught the strands, weaving them gold. He pressed his face to the softness, his chest heavy as if he'd found home after a lifetime wandering. Marisol tilted her head back, breath quick, a faint sigh slipping free. Her hand rested on his shoulder, not to push nor to cling, but to give silent leave. He traced her cheek with slow kisses, each a question. Her shiver, each an answer. His rough palm pressed gentle circles on her back, as though carving the warmth into his skin. When she opened her eyes, green glowed under lamplight. No longer the proud mistress of Silver Creek, but a woman trembling at the first yielding of her heart. Elias kissed her again, longer, deeper. A fire rising, yet tempered with reverence, souls joined before bodies followed. On the wall, the lamp cast one shadow, not two. Their breath mingled, their bodies leaned close, not in hunger, but in understanding. Tonight, they had crossed the line. No mistress and foreman, no proud woman and drifter, only a man and a woman, letting their hearts speak truth for the first time. Outside, the night wind whispered across the roof. Inside, breaths fell in rhythm, slow then quick, leaving behind a warmth that filled the room. When stillness returned, Marisol lay on her side. Black hair spilled across the pillow, her green eyes soft as a spring. Elias laced his fingers with hers. "You won't leave, will you?" she whispered, voice trembling, as though afraid of her own weakness. He held her gaze, steady and rare in its certainty. "No, not unless you send me," Marisol smiled faintly, eyes closing as she laid her head against him. For the first time in years, she drifted into sleep without struggle. Elias stayed awake, watching the peace on her face, his heart full of thanks. That night, they crossed more than distance, no longer unwilling companions, no longer mistress and hand. They had found each other, on terms no one else could set. And it was only the beginning. In the days after the banquet, and the night they crossed the line, Silver Creek Ranch wore a new air. Hands whispered that their mistress looked lighter, and Elias, the drifter once misplaced, now moved beside her, from stable to supper table. Not hand in hand, not flaunting, but close enough for others to sense a bond forming. They rode to town together for supplies, lingered at the fabric store, even stood side by side at the post office counter. Watching eyes were everywhere. Some whispered admiration, others clucked in doubt. Cortland Arroyo seized it. In saloons, in markets, even at the cattlemen's meetings, he sowed his poison. Elias Thorne, he declared, was nothing but a pauper clinging to Silver Creek's mistress for wealth. A vagrant, he sneered, living off a woman's trust. The word spread through the valley like wildfire over dry grass. Marisol heard it one market morning. Two women passed by, believing her out of earshot. They say he lived 10 years in the mountains with not a dime. Now he's hanging on to Miss Vega to change his fate. Well, just look at him. A woman like her has no shortage of choice, Marisol walked on, face composed, though her heart tightened. That night she sat long at her window, eyes drifting to Elias kindling fire in the yard. Doubt crept in, not because she believed Cortland, but because she had known too many bargains struck at men's tables. Mateo, the round cook, saw it all and winced. He knew what Elias had done since arriving, mending fences, patching roofs, teaching boys to rope, even spending his own money on seed for Widow Patterson. So Mateo hatched one of his good ideas, and with him, good often meant trouble. He scribbled a list of Elias's deeds, ending with, "Folks should know the true kindness of Elias Thorne." His plan was to tack it on the kitchen door for ranch hands, but with flour still on his fingers, he blundered and nailed it to the town's public notice board instead. By morning, Red Willow buzzed. Townsfolk crowded the board, reading the clumsy scrawl. Elias Thorne mended the stable roof in the storm without pay. He found Widow Patterson's lost cow. He taught young Tim Morrison knots so the steer wouldn't drag him. He gave his only coat to a family who lost their home last winter. He fixed the granary door so wind wouldn't ruin the seed. He never asked for a dime at the bottom. Mateo Cantu, cook of Silver Creek. People nodded. Some dabbed at eyes. Cortland's rumor dried up, replaced with the picture of a man working quiet without seeking praise. By afternoon, word reached Marisol. An old woman pressed the sheet into her hands, eyes shining. "Bless you, Miss Vega. You're lucky. A man like that doesn't come often." Marisol read every line, her hand trembling. Each detail, things Elias had never spoken of, struck like blows against the wall of doubt Cortland had built. That evening, she found Elias at the caisson, well, hauling up water, his figure outlined in sunset. Nothing in his bearing had changed, but within her, all was altered. She stepped close, took the cloth from his hand, and gently wiped his brow. Elias stilled, surprised by the touch. She said nothing, only held his gaze, green eyes filled with a trust she rarely gave. That night, they sat on the porch together, the wind carrying the scent of young grass. Marisol's voice came low. "There are times I've wondered why you came here." Elias stayed silent, waiting. "But today I read what others have seen in you. And I realized, sometimes, I am the last to see what's plain." He did not answer with words. He only reached, his hand covering hers where it rested on the bench. Warmth spread between them, needing nothing more. Cortland's rumor had planted doubt, but Mateo's foolish notice had turned into a torch, burning through lies, lighting the truth Marisol needed. Elias was not there for pay or shelter alone. He was becoming a pillar, for the ranch, for her, and for something greater neither dared name yet. Outside, night cloaked the valley. But within Silver Creek Ranch, a new trust had been kindled. That night the sky lay heavy with clouds. No moon or stars. Only the drone of insects and the faint glow of an oil lamp on the porch of Silver Creek Ranch. Marisol sat with a cold cup in her hands, fingers tracing the rim. Mateo's clumsy notice still lingered in her thoughts. It had made her trust Elias more. Yet a shadow remained. She knew almost nothing of the life he carried before Silver Creek. The door creaked open. Elias stepped out, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair damp with sweat from a long day's labor. He sank into the chair beside her, big hands braced on his knees. Silence held them, broken only by the wind across the prairie. At last, Marisol turned. Her eyes grazed the scar near his temple, the rugged planes of his face. "Mr. Thorne," she said softly, voice like dry leaves brushing together. "I want to know, before Silver Creek, who were you?" Elias stilled. The question cut like a blade, striking the place he had kept hidden. He drew a breath, fists clenching, then easing open. "If I tell you, you may never see me the same again." "I will listen," she replied. He leaned back against the post, gaze reaching into the dark. 12 years ago, I was in Denver, just a hot-blooded young man, working the docks. One night I passed a saloon, heard crying, shouting. A woman was dragged down the steps. Her husband, a rich man's son, drunk, struck her like she was nothing but a sack of grain. His voice rasped, hand tightening on his knee. I didn't think. I stepped in, told him to stop. He pulled a knife. We grappled. He fell. His head struck the wooden step. Blood spread fast. Something I'll never forget. Elias paused, eyes fixed on the dark horizon, not daring to meet hers. They arrested me that night. The court called it self-defense. But his family, wealthy, powerful, they saw to it my life was ruined. I served a year in prison, branded a killer. When I came out, no one would hire me. So I went to the mountains, hunted, guided, lived alone. I thought I'd die there, a ghost among rocks and snow. The last words fell like ashes. Elias dropped his head, hands locked together, braced for judgment. Marisol sat still, heart pounding heavy. In her mind, the fragments of Elias aligned, the quiet man, scarred hands, eyes shadowed with sorrow. He was no vagrant chasing coin. He was a man who had once stepped forward to defend a woman and paid with his youth. Her hand reached across, resting on his. He flinched at first, then slowly eased. The rough, weathered palm trembled beneath her steady hold. "Elias," she whispered, voice carrying like a vow, "you stood for the defenseless. Let men call you what they will. What I see is a man who would not turn away." He lifted his gaze. In his brown eyes flickered something new, shock and relief. "You're not afraid?" She shook her head. "Afraid, yes. But more afraid if I never knew who you truly are." She tightened her hold. "From this day, let this be your home. Not shelter, not a passing place. Our home." The words struck like wind blowing open a locked door. Years of bitterness, of exile, seemed to fall from his shoulders. Elias bent forward, resting his brow against hers, eyes closed. A hot tear slid down his cheek before he knew it. Marisol did not wipe it away. She only leaned in, pressing her lips gently to his. This kiss carried no storm, no fire. It was deep, still, a seal that told him he belonged. They remained together until the lamp burned low. No more words were needed. Presence was enough. For the first time, Elias felt his blood-stained past loosen its hold. It no longer chained him. It had become the reason he knew the worth of the home now before him. The forge blazed all afternoon, red as a racing heart. Elias stood bare-armed, hammer striking iron with each blow ringing like the song of earth itself. Sweat ran down his spine, mingling with ash, but his eyes shone brighter than the sparks flying free. Every strike was more than metal. It was his life, hammered into a promise. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, he laid the cooled piece upon the bench. A brand, round and gleaming, with the letters E and M entwined within a heart. He held it in his hand, feeling his palm tremble, not from spent strength, but from knowing this gift would shape his future. That night, he found Marisol on the porch, ledger open on her lap, lamplight tracing the curve of her lashes. When she lifted her head, her green eyes glowed with warmth, shadowed by the burden she bore. Elias stepped close and took her calloused hands. "Marisol," his voice rasped, "I once thought I'd die old in the mountains. Then I came here. You gave me a home. I don't want to remain just a hired man. I want to stand beside you, in work, in life." He drew out the brand. The lamplight caught the heart, binding their letters. Dropping to one knee, he lifted it as though offering his very soul. "If you'll have me, I want this mark burned into our cattle. But more than that, I want it burned into us, that I belong to you and you to me." Forever Marisol raised her hand to her lips, shoulders trembling. Her life had been bartered, arranged, never chosen. Now this man, scarred by sorrow yet steadfast, knelt before her in freedom. Tears slid, shining in the firelight. She nodded, whispering but sure, "Forever, yes." Elias rose, gathering her into his arms. No contract bound them now, only a vow forged in steel and blood. Weeks later, the wedding was held in the open air. Wildflowers scattered across the meadow, bright and unpretentious. Neighbors gathered with laughter, cakes, and fiddles. Mateo bustled in his flower-stained apron. Horses lined the rail fence, the scent of hay riding the breeze. Marisol wore a plain white gown, sewn by her own hands, wild blooms woven in her veil. She seemed born of the prairie itself. Elias waited beneath an arch Mateo had hammered together. When she stepped forward, the wind lifted her hair, and the crowd hushed, hearts thudding with each of her steps. Their vows rang clear, not recited words, but chosen truths. "I won't promise I'll always be right," Elias said, his voice steady, "but I promise I'll always be honest." "I won't promise I'll never cry," Marisol answered, her eyes deep with light. "But I promise I'll never walk away." As they leaned for the kiss, a voice sliced through the stillness. Cortland Arroyo, clad in black velvet, strode from the crowd, a glass of red wine in hand. His sneer cut sharp. "How touching! A former convict and a ranch mistress. Now that's a tale to remember." Murmurs rippled, unease rising. Elias stiffened, but Marisol gripped his hand, shaking her head. She needed no defense of fists. Then Mateo appeared, staggering with a great jug of lemonade. He stumbled, just so, and the whole jug toppled over Cortland, drenching him from crown to boots, mint leaves plastered to his velvet. For a breath, the meadow froze. Then laughter roared, rolling like thunder. Cortland sputtered, red-faced beneath the pale drink. Even Marisol laughed, her eyes gleaming. Cortland flung his glass aside and stormed off, chased by jeers down the dusty road. The vows continued in joy. Elias and Marisol sealed their promise with a kiss, not shadowed by doubt or fear. Applause cracked like gunfire. voices lifted in song. Beneath the endless sky, two once strangers, bound by contract, shaped by fire and tears, stood together at last. Not for duty, not for gain, but for love, forged in flame, tempered by faith, and chosen by their own hearts. 2 years had passed since the wedding beneath the arch of wildflowers, and Silver Creek Ranch had changed so much that folks in the valley still marveled when they spoke of it. Fences stood straight and new, pastures stretched green and wide. Herds of cattle thrived across the land. The main house now bore 2 added wings, its roof painted bright, and everywhere echoed the sound of children. Elias and Marisol were no longer 2 lost souls bound by a hollow contract. They were husband and wife, father and mother, the pillars of a land reborn. Their 3 children, spirited Tomas, tender Esperanza, and little Solana, had turned a once lonely house into a true home. Mornings now began in a chaos warm with life. Tomas galloped the porch with his wooden horse, carved by his father's hands. Esperanza curled in Marisol's lap, absorbed in a story. Solana, the youngest, rode her father's shoulders, tugging his hair into tangles while Elias only laughed. Marisol watched it all with a fullness she once believed she would never know. The years of being traded like a possession lay far behind. Now she was a woman of land, of family, and of a love she had chosen. Mateo, of course, remained the ranch's comic soul. His cooking was unmatched, though always paired with calamity. Once, during the harvest feast, he tripped carrying a tray of cakes and sent them sailing, only to land neatly in Solana's cradle. Marisol wept with laughter. Elias shook his head while holding his shoulders, and the children squealed with delight. But Silver Creek was more than laughter. It bore the mark of 2 lives remade. Elias was no longer a drifter shamed by his past, but a man steady and rooted, leading and providing. He had built a new water system, sparing the valley from drought. Neighbors came to learn, and he shared freely. Marisol turned the ranch into a place of gathering. She taught women to keep accounts, to manage stock, to believe in the strength of their own hands. They called her La Señora del Campo, the woman of the fields, not only for her authority, but for her compassion. One summer evening, as the sun spilled gold over the ridges, the family climbed the hill behind the house. Tomas and Esperanza ran ahead with wildflowers in hand. Elias carried Solana, while Marisol walked at his side, her fingers woven with his. At the crest, they stopped. Below stretched Silver Creek Ranch, pastures rolling, fences gleaming, cattle dotting the valley. From afar, smoke curled from the kitchen chimney, where Mateo no doubt wrestled another disaster. Marisol stood in the breeze, hair lifted by the wind. She turned to Elias, green eyes aglow. "Look," she whispered, "all of this, we built together." Elias gripped her hand, his voice deep as the land itself. Not just a ranch, a home. The children gathered, Tomas shouting, "Home!" Esperanza echoed, her voice clear as a bell. Even Solana, still learning, babbled "Ome," and laughter spilled across the hilltop. Marisol leaned her head on Elias's shoulder, whispering once more for him alone, "Home." And he answered, firm and sure, "Home." The sunset poured its fire across the sky. In that moment, there was no courtland, no rumor, no haunted past. Only a legacy forged in trust, choice, and love. Silver Creek was no longer a mark on Montana's map. It was a symbol of renewal, of a man who once lost all and a woman once treated as a bargain. They had found each other, chosen each other, and built a life no power could deny. The laughter of children, the thunder of hooves, the whisper of wind through the grass, all blended into a song without end. And on that hill, Elias and Marisol stood with their children, embraced in the glow of evening. A home, a legacy, a life bound in love. Perhaps all of us pass through uncertain years like Elias and Marisol, when love feels out of reach and a home seems fragile. Yet sometimes patience, kindness, and the courage to take another's hand can turn emptiness into a journey worth remembering. Two souls once lost had built a hearth, a legacy for their children and for the land itself. And maybe the truest wealth was not the prosperity of Silver Creek Ranch, but the simple moment on a hill when they whispered one word together: home. Dear friends, if this tale stirred your heart, we invite you to leave a like, to subscribe, and to share your memories of home in the comments, whether it was laughter in a kitchen, hands held firm, or a quiet evening under a fading sky. For in the end, love and belonging are the richest legacy of all.